Hello, it's Tom with Digital Foundry, and joining me today is Dave Vitton.
Hey guys, how's it going?
And from Germany, we have John Linneman on the line there.
Good morning, guys. How's it going over there?
Pretty good, thank you. So today we thought we'd look at 4K televisions and the experiences that gives us. And later on in the podcast, we'll be talking about the general lay of the land in terms of where 4K televisions are in 2016. So I guess to start, we'll be talking about, well, what does 4K bring us, Dave, in terms of the gaming experience and also, I guess, in movies as well?
Yeah, well, for me, the first thing that I noticed with the 4K gaming is the increase in pixel density gives us much greater clarity.
Right.
So it's not just about sort of raw sharpness and detail, but you get an image that is kind of a bit more natural rather than looking at a digital display. If you've got a sort of a reasonable screen size, you get a very smooth picture that's very clean and sharp, and it's just a bit more natural. And of course, you do get more detail as well.
Yeah, I'm with you, Dave. I do think the increased pixel count is it's a pretty significant jump. And I think one of the things we always see with these high-resolution displays is sort of like that chart that talks about the viewing distance and how high a resolution you actually need for it to be effective, right? So it's like, oh, if you sit so far away, then you only need a 1080p screen, or 4K is useless. But I think we've kind of agreed now that it doesn't really pan out all that well. I mean, what you actually see, you may not be able to resolve every pixel, but there is still a benefit in that the pixel structure of the TV kind of goes away at a certain point, and it takes on more of a, like sort of a picture on glass look as opposed to a digital screen in a way, that it just looks really nice. What do you think?
Yeah, it's like in modern 1080p games even, if you remove the anti-aliasing, then you get a kind of stair-step still. You can still see the kind of pixel structure, that pixel crawl and visual noise on gates and fences in games that you have to kind of overcome with really logical anti-aliasing methods. But with 4K, you can pretty much ride it out without any anti-aliasing. I've seen it in Mantis Burn Racing actually recently. I'm doing a piece on that, and it looks really great. I mean, you don't need anything to sort that. And I suppose that's true of a lot of games running at 4K natively. I mean, I don't know what you guys have experienced in terms of the games, especially you, John, with your 4K TV.
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of testing on various 4K games, and one of the things I'm kind of working on now or looking at is what games can you play at 4K 60 frames per second on a mid-range graphics card, right? Because we always hear the 4K barrier to entry is way too high, and it's true. If you try to play a lot of the more modern demanding games, then something like a GTX 970 isn't going to cut it. But if you go back just a few years to some still very nice looking games, you end up with awesome results. Like a couple of the games I've been really impressed with, there's something like Need for Speed Hot Pursuit 2009, Sonic Generations, games like that, which very bright, vivid colors, lots of beautiful detail in the scene, and when you actually see it at native 4K, it just takes on a whole new look. It's really quite striking.
I think Sonic Generations was one we spoke about before, and you said it was the highlight.
Yeah, that was one of the ones that really impressed me, just with its extremely vivid colors and just the extra clarity you get. It almost starts looking like a pre-rendered movie at points. You just can't see those individual pixels anymore from a normal viewing distance, which in my case is actually around, I kind of vary it by my chair, but between 5 to 8 feet, depending on what I'm feeling like,
Yeah, so I suppose there is a distinction there between a 4K monitor used for the office and what you'd use in the living room.
Exactly.
We've had a couple of panels in the office that are about 40 inches. I believe Richard actually has been working with a 40-inch Samsung KU6400, and he said it was a revelation, to put it in his own terms. It was a huge benefit for editing work and that sort of thing. But for games specifically in the living room, say, where it's most likely to be placed, you're looking at a lot of games like in the PS3 360 era, I suppose, like Skyrim and that era of game, which would upscale quite nicely, well, render natively quite easily on a GTX 970, I guess, or something around that ballpark. You don't need to go crazy.
Yeah, exactly.
And it kind of runs at odds with, I guess, the quality of the textures in those games. You know, they're not built for that level of sharpness necessarily, but it is pretty cool. And you know, if you want to see these games at a level of detail you've never seen before, especially looking to the distance, that's something 4K really does, you know, brings to the table.
Yeah, one of the things I noticed, I was testing out Resident Evil 5, you know, to test the scaling on the different TVs, and I was surprised playing it in 4K. Yeah, the textures don't look great, but the image takes on far more depth than it did before, and the sharpness and clarity with regards to all those polygon assets looks a lot more impressive.
So it surprised you how much of a jump it took, even a game from that era. It's kind of
yeah, definitely. I mean, I played it on, it wasn't so impressive on the 40-inch Samsung, but I was really surprised when it was on the 58-inch Panasonic that it looked that good on such a large screen. Even with the textures being compromised to a point, it was still a jump over 1080p, and at 60 frames per second, it was a really satisfying experience.
And this TV here is the Panasonic DX750. It's a 55-inch panel, so it's
58 actually.
58 is it? Okay.
Yeah. We managed to get 58-inch for 1,200.
That's not bad. Okay. And John, you've got a 55, is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
The LG OLED.
Yeah.
So I suppose for the size, this is about the sort of point you should be looking for if you're in the market for a 4K TV, about 50 to 60 inches. That seems to be a sweet spot for living room size while making the 4K appreciable. But in terms of games that are built for 4K, you've also got the HDR aspect. Dave, what do you reckon are the benefits of this? You know, you speak to me a lot about what, well, I suppose the conflicts between these different HDR standards right now, and how it's a bit confusing. It's a difficult landscape to just walk into and expect a perfect 4K HDR display right now.
Yeah, I think the problem we have at the moment is there's obviously conflicting standards with HDR, but there are different benefits HDR brings. So on the one hand, HDR, you've got sort of a much bigger sort of range between absolute black and then the brightest white. So you've got much higher end sort of contrast. But then you've also got more detail, which is done via the wider color gamma, and then going from sort of 8 to 10-bit panels gives you more shades of color and then more shades of like gray in between. So you get more detail, but the kind of conflict comes with how the different TV technologies render that. So, you know, the LCDs tend to favor the upper end range, you know, sort of the details that are sort of 1,000 nits or above tend to get resolved a bit better.
So 1,000 nits is something a lot of people say is recommended if you're getting a HDR display, a panel with 1,000 nits.
Yes.
If it's an LCD, LED backlit type.
Yeah, and they say that because in terms of mastering standards, the baseline level where like Blu-ray content or UHD Blu-rays are mastered at is 1,000 nits of brightness and details up to 1,000 nits. They can go up to, I think, 4,000 nits for HDR10 in terms of detail. Brightness, TVs can't sort of get up there yet. And then Dolby Vision can go up to 10,000, but they specify a peak of 1,000 so that you still get the much bigger dynamic range, and you get quite a lot of that high-end detail. You don't lose it so much. So.
Well, it's an important part of the package when buying a new TV. Obviously, you want to future-proof what you just bought, especially if you're spending, say, you know, £500 to £1,000 or even more if you've got the budget. So it's worth bearing these things in mind when you're forking all that out. I suppose the biggest example of the benefits of HDR are those classic shots, especially in films like The Revenant or Mad Max, where you see the sky and you've got the sun glaring down.
Oh yeah, that's beautiful.
I don't know if you've got any experience of this, John, with the time you've had with your OLED.
Yeah, I've watched a couple different films. I've checked out The Revenant, Deadpool, and various other like Netflix shows using the Dolby Vision feature. And of course, plenty of games. And obviously, we're kind of at that, the plasma LCD war of the mid-2000s has returned in full force, and this time it is LCD versus OLED, would you say? And
I think that's fair.
Yeah, so, you know, it's obviously more about black levels and just that intense, the high ANSI contrast ratio that you get on an OLED versus LCD, which can have a higher peak brightness, but you sacrifice some of the black levels, even on the best sets with local dimming, where you still see some blooming. But I think at this point, both of them are looking pretty good, but the thing to consider and why I'm interested in the future is where we go from here. I feel like LCD is starting to reach the point where it's basically tapped out, right? Like, it's been around for so long, and it's a very easy to manufacture technology, but really getting the maximum picture quality, I feel like we're bumping up against the limits of what it can do. Whereas stuff like OLED technology is still very, very new in televisions, right? And I would say I'm happy with what I have, but I wouldn't necessarily buy yet if you're looking, unless you find a good deal. Just because I do think there's still a lot of evolution to come, and I'm hoping in the next couple years we'll see that improve.
I was looking at the Panasonic after we bought it. We went through a bunch of different screens, and I noticed the whole issue of grey to grey response times per pixel was still an issue. And I was surprised because, you know, for a grand and a bit sterling, you're expecting that issue to be eradicated. That's an issue we had 5 years ago on LCD panels, but it's still there. I mean, Dave, what do you reckon of the state of LCDs? Is it something that will go away with evolution, or is it just here to stay?
I think in terms of motion handling and sort of panel response, LCDs have definitely plateaued. I mean, in terms of like contrast as well as black levels, we're kind of reaching like VT20 plasma levels, but I'm not sure without any local dimming how far that can go. I think the future of LCD tech, from what I've read, is going to be more a transition to, say, QLED, which is taking like quantum dots and replacing like the LCD part and doing, instead of OLED, you've got quantum dots filling in for the organic light emitting diode layer, and so you're getting deeper blacks. But that's a good, you know, probably 10 years away. I mean, there's basically another step they have to do before they can reach QLED, and that's on kind of Samsung's roadmap, but there's still an intimate stage they have to do, so we're stuck with LCD for quite a while yet. But then again, you know, OLED's looking to improve. If they get the yields and the kind of above black response kind of evened out so it's less noisy, there's plenty of development on OLED that can still be done. It's just getting the manufacturing to a point where it's consistent and at a lower cost.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one as well, Dave. But I think another thing to consider right now is that we're still kind of in the middle of a standards change, right? I mean, like HDMI, for instance, the HDMI 2.0A is the current standard. That's right?
That's it.
Yeah, so there's bandwidth limitations on that of around 18 gigabits per second, I think, something like that, which basically limits what you can actually transmit. For instance, if you want to send 4K at 60 hertz over HDMI, you're currently stuck using chroma subsampling, for instance, if you want to take advantage of 10-bit or 12-bit color, right?
Right.
And that, I think, it's not a huge deal at 4K, I'm finding, because the subsampling artifacts are, it's almost like you're reducing the color to like something closer to like a 1080p resolution, or still a little bit above that. If you look closely, you can see those artifacts. So from normal viewing distances, it's not really that noticeable, but it would be nice to get full RGB color at with the full resolution at 4K 60 or higher, because, you know, we would, you know, going beyond 60 hertz would be great as well, I think. So,
yeah.
Not that that's not going to happen next year, mind you, but we will hopefully at least see improvements there. In addition to the HDR spec itself, HDR10 currently doesn't support dynamic metadata, and metadata is essentially how the display understands how to deal with the color information, with the information being fed to it. And that's something that Dolby Vision can do currently, but HDR10 cannot. And there is concern that this is going to require another HDMI standard upgrade, and it might leave some of us early adopters out in the cold. It's not yet clear.
Right, so this is pointing to an issue we all seem to have had with buying a 4K TV, and especially prospective buyers looking through all the reviews. It doesn't seem like there's an absolutely perfect 4K display out there, especially not for
Definitely not.
A decent budget. I mean, Dave, would you say there's a perfect screen out there? We went through a bunch of them at a local store, and it was, a matter of picking the one with 4K HDR and low input lag for gaming. And we ended up with the Panasonic DX750. But in the end, we looked at it and thought, well, there's still a very glossy panel, and there's still some other issues. What do you reckon of that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess the trouble is, if you want to get a better experience, you have to spend a lot more money. Like the Panasonic here, the limitations are that there's just a global sort of backlight dimming. There is kind of like pseudo local dimming, but it's not very good. It's kind of basic. You just get like individual columns. So you have like a one column on mid setting, and on high setting it just dims 3 vertical columns, which is kind of useless.
Oof.
Or you can have
That's not great.
global, which is like the whole backlight. But I think at the moment there isn't like a complete sort of perfect TV. With 1080p screens you could go and buy a top-end Panasonic or Pioneer Plasma, and you would be getting like reference performance. That would be as good as it possibly could get. But with 4K, each screen has like different benefits. The OLEDs, you get that awesome contrast performance with perfect blacks, but the HDR10 implementation on the Dolby Vision chipset clips details above 6,000 nits. Dolby Vision, it doesn't. Dolby Vision content is fine. It doesn't do any of that. It doesn't clip anything at all. But the HDR10 implementation could be a bit better. And then on LCDs, if you want to get a really good experience where you're kind of not sort of sacrificing black levels when HDR, like bright areas are on screen, then you need to go up to like high-end panels like the Sony Z9, the Samsung KF9500, and they're like what, 2-3 grand.
It's pushing it.
It's expensive.
So I think at this point then we're basically, you're kind of looking at two things. If you want to be an early adopter and you have a pretty high budget, at least from my perspective, I'm curious what you guys think, but there's basically two types of TVs I would look at that I've seen in person. I do think that Sony's ZD9 LCD TV that's just released is probably the best looking LCD I've ever seen. And then beyond that, of course, the LG OLEDs are also excellent. And I would go for that, but the Sony made me definitely think, I could live with this as well.
For me, as someone who's looking tentatively at 4K, looking to pair it with the PS4 Pro or the Scorpio even, I'm thinking now's a bit too early to strike. There's so much flux in these standards. The HDMI, the HDR standards are moving about. We've got issues with firmware, all these things, the input lag.
Absolutely.
It's when you make this purchase, you want it to be right. And in 2016, it feels like you have to spend very big to get the most value from it. I mean, in your case, John, you really struck gold with the LG OLED, but not everything's perfect, but it's certainly a great display.
I got a good deal on it. I'm happy with it, but yeah. I would caution people, if you're this far into 2016, let's at least wait for CES and see what's coming up, because there's still issues with all of these displays, and the standards aren't quite set, like you said. So I do feel like unless you're a crazy early adopter like myself, I would say wait. Don't do it right now.
Right. That being said, we did kind of make the jump and buy a panel. We bought the Panasonic DX750, and Dave, you reviewed this one. I mean, what were the decisions that led to this one being behind us right now?
Right, I guess the primary decision was that it worked with HDR and game mode.
No problems.
So yeah, I mean basically you can select cinema mode, game mode and HDR, and you get about 48 milliseconds of latency.
Which is still high.
It is still high, you can notice it, like the little KU 6400 is 19 milliseconds, and playing KOF, I can immediately feel the difference. The Panasonic feels responsive, but on that little Samsung, it feels like there's no lag. So it is a compromise, but at the time when we were looking, that was kind of the one we had to accept, I guess.
On that point, I would encourage people to test this out for themselves, because I do think there's a variation in sensitivities on that. If you're playing a 2D fighting game, for instance, yes, I do think that extra speed does help, but I think for the average game, and even retro games, around 40 to 50 milliseconds actually feels a lot better than you'd think. It's not that bad. I think once you cross like the 60 or 70 point, that's when it starts to feel sluggish.
That's the point where you're playing with a lot of post-processing, and it's usually meant for films where input isn't really
I feel like as long as
necessary.
you're under 50 though, it still can feel quite good for most people. Now again, everybody's got a different tolerance for that. For myself, it's actually okay, and I've been living with that for years with my plasma. But you know, I think you need to test it. I think people should probably, if you're going to buy this, go to the store, bring a game console. I've done this many times before. Test it out, see what you think.
Okay then, to wrap up, let's go around the table and ask the big question. Is it too soon to buy a 4K TV, or is now the time to strike? John, what do you reckon?
I think that's a question that depends upon your budget and whether or not you have the itch for new technology. For myself, I'm very happy with the purchase, but I do feel that if you're a little bit more concerned about potential future proofing, because we still don't know about things like the HDMI standards, my suggestion is to wait. But again, if you do jump now, I think you would be happy with one of the high-end OLED TVs or something like the ZD9 from Sony, and possibly even Samsung's high-end KS series as well. Those are all good displays. I think most people would be very happy with them. They look awesome, and you can do a lot of good stuff with them right now. But if budget is a concern and you're worried about future-proofing, again, I'd say wait.
Right, so Dave, what do you reckon?
I would probably echo the same sentiments as John here in terms of sort of waiting. Now, you can get a really good 4K HDR experience today, but if you want to get sort of a future-proof with the standards, you know, if you want to have like dynamic metadata of HDR10, then it's going to be something that comes into probably next year's display. And the problem that I found as well was that I can only really sort of comfortably fit in a 40-inch TV in my room, and at the moment, if you look, all of the good HDR 4K displays are 50 or above. So at the moment, that technology hasn't trickled down to 40 inches. But I think, yeah, if you're itching to get a slice of HDR 4K gaming, then for around sort of £1,500, you can get a solid display that will do a good job of it. But I would say if you don't want to buy twice, you know, like upgrade again in 2 or 3 years, then it's probably worth waiting just to see, so you can maybe save a bit more money and choose a display that's going to last you a bit longer, I guess.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I mean, John's spoken with his wallet on the LG, and I'd go with his approach right now. OLED seems to be the path for me, but I think my budget is only going to be able to stretch to, say, an LCD panel type. About £1,000, 500 to 1,000 is, you know, the region I think most people would be looking at for a 4K display, and I want all those things to be future-proof. All the standards have to be there and have to be supported as I go through the next 5 years at least. So with that in mind, I've got to look to 2017 before I even consider it. So I suppose the consensus is, if you're wanting something that will last, wait till 2017 until all these standards have matured. So that's about a wrap for today. If you found our chat on 4K displays useful or interesting in any way, do like or subscribe below. Let us know in the comments what you think about your 4K television purchase and what you think about this going forward. But until next time, thanks for watching and see you in the next one.